Hey, what's up guys? It's SaucemanK, and today I'm here to talk about a new series on my channel. Today we're going to be talking about Jujutsu Kaisen, otherwise known as JJK, as well as the main villain and current face of that series, Ryomen Sukuna. So if you've kept up with the manga at all, or really used the internet over the last couple of months, like TikTok or Instagram Reels, you've probably heard or seen some of the memes and complaints surrounding the final arc of the series, the Shinjuku Showdown arc. Specifically about how the main villain, Sukuna, otherwise known as Fraud Kuna, is a fraud, and how the author of the series, GeGe, has been favoring Sukuna, other characters, and has been wasting the potential of those characters just to apparently glaze Sukuna. And I'm here to say that, for one, the people making these claims, they really don't know what they're talking about. I mean, you really can't read the manga for any significant portion of the time it's been out or understand what's happening in it and still come away with that, idea. But for starters, I want to really address the Sukuna slander specifically because, people think that he's being, glazed, and it's just like, you probably just haven't read the manga. I don't know, I don't want to repeat myself, but it's going to take us to the first chapter of the manga, specifically titled Ryomen Sukuna, right? So that might seem like heavy glazing off the bat, but just use your brain for a moment and listen to the explanation. So, like I mentioned, from the very first chapter, Sukuna is literally tied to the series of JJK. The first chapter is literally called Sukuna, and rightfully so. I mean, he represents the central idea pushing the story, which is what it means to be the strongest. And even further comparisons are made later, where he's called the Dishonored One, which is a parallel to the Honored One, Satoru Gojo's title, who he's known as the strongest sorcerer of the modern era. So from that, frame one, GeGe makes it obvious that the story will revolve around Sukuna and his title. And for the next 211 chapters, I believe it's 212, where Sukuna fully incarnates, but up until that, for the first, 211 or so chapters of the story, Sukuna's this, slow built-up menace in the background, where, he's always just, hinted and foreshadowed to be this super insane force that's, just waiting to, come out, basically, And he's sitting there biding his time, being built up, waiting for his chance to strike. And, when he does, it's pretty insane. But that's not to say that the entire story was only focused on Sukuna, right? Like, other characters go through these insane arcs and have a lot of growth during those 211 chapters. And even after the fact, right? Like, they don't just stop growing after Sukuna's introduced. But the main point, right, is that he is the main event, right? Like, obviously, chapter 1 is called Ryomen Sukuna. So, he's the main thing being built up, right? And if anybody thought any differently, you must have just not been reading the manga. I don't know. Sorry, I had to clear my throat there, but you must have just not been reading the manga. Seriously, like, the first chapter is called Ryomen Sukuna, So it's like, how should GeGe portray this insane threat, this parallel to the Honored One? Because we see how they hype up Gojo, he's this impenetrable force that's just always, he's just glowing on panel. He's just this insane thing that everybody respects and looks up to. So how should he portray the counterpart, alright, the Dishonored One? Should he write Sukuna as a super unsatisfying villain that pulls his punches for the sake of the master plan like Kenjaku, right? Well, speaking from how the community reacted after seeing Kenjaku and Takaba's fight, I'd say that, seeing, somebody with the status of Kenjaku or Sukuna, the main villains, seeing one of them go out without actually throwing down for real, it's probably going to be super disappointing, right? So I say the fact that, Sukuna's this relentless force that chews up and spits out anything that's placed in front of him, it's probably for the best, since that's kind of how the strongest should be in any story that's going to represent that concept, right? And he has every right to be like that in the story, Like, he should be the most imposing thing on the story, or in the story, I should say, or on panel, on screen, whatever, right? Like, imagine if Aizen or Madara were getting shown up by the side cast in their respective war arcs. It wouldn't really make a lot of sense, And sure, like, some of those lesser characters in the animes, or the series, they can have their moments and they can shine, right? Like, for example, Rock Lee, when he runs up and he kicks Madara when he's on the Ten Tails. Kisuke Urahara, he seals Madara, the main villain of that arc, the Bleach War arc, And even in JJK, right, Kusakabe, who's just like he's not like a random sorcerer, but he's just like a grade 1 sorcerer. But still, he pulls up and he flashes on Sukuna. He does a lot of cool shit. So, those the lesser characters, they do have their moments, right? They can perform and they can do cool shit, but that never changes the fact that the main villain is the strongest one there, you know? Those moments are just to show, like, hey, these other characters exist, they can throw down, but they're not going to overshadow the main thread of the series, you know what I mean? They're not going to put them down for good or anything significant, you know? That's the job of the main character or characters, and the reasoning for that isn't just because they're super strong, but there's a narrative reason behind that, which is that the main characters usually serve as a direct foil to whatever villain that they're fighting, right? So in Jujutsu Kaisen's case, it's Yuji and Sukuna, right? Yuji embodies the purest form of selflessness, which is represented through the cog mentality, and Sukuna, the purest form of selfishness, which, you know, is resulted through the calamity mentality. That's what he tries to tell Jogo about in Shibuya. And it's only through Yuji adopting the traits of a monster that he's able to actually stand on equal footing with Sukuna, right? The same is true for anybody like Kashimo, Gojo, later Yuta, or Maki, right? Anybody like that. Anybody who wants to fight with Sukuna, they have to, you know, actually become a monster in their own right, you know? Sometimes literally, like in Kashimo's form, he gets like this like weird body with like 3 eyes. Sometimes, you know, in the sense of the word, right? Like I mentioned with Yuta, how he desecrates Gojo's corpse and starts wearing his, you know, flesh like Kenjaku did, you know? That's kind of what I'm saying. Like, they have to become a monster in their own right in order to actually have done something, I guess, worthy of being on the level of the strongest, you know? And that's the narrative explanation that GeGe gives for why Sukuna's on the top, you know, and quote-unquote glazed by, you know, GeGe and everybody. That's what everybody says. But the reasoning is because he's committed to being a monster. He's perfectly fine with doing these heinous acts, and in all honesty, it's kind of the main thing that drives him, right? Any other character that doesn't, you know, I guess perform on that level, it's because they lack that resolve and they lack that drive, right? And that's why they're not considered strong within the confines of the story, you know? But that's not like to say that they're wasted, you know? Like, the character's value, it's not only given through the story because of, like, what they can punch and destroy. Characters like Nobara or Nanami, who didn't really do much in terms of taking down the main villain of their arc, they still had value to offer the story, right? Their deaths placed further curses on the main character Yuji, which in Shibuya, and which is also extrapolated throughout the rest of the show, those curses help, you know, push Yuji to keep on going and, you know, beat down Mahito and eventually Sukuna, like I just said. Those characters, Nobara, Nanami, anyone who dies, you know, Junpei, right? They're not wasted, you know? They have offer, or they have value to give within the story. You know, they have a role that they're given, and they fulfill that role. You know, they're not wasted. Even Megami, for example. Megami, his main value through the story was through the value of his technique, right? Which was foreshadowed to be able to take down Gojo, right? The strongest, you know, the whole linchpin surrounding everything in the story, right? And Gojo's death is what prompted the rest of the JJK cast to undergo their own awakenings, right? So not only does, you know, Megami's ability serve to, you know, progress the story, like, oh, you know, there's a new strongest around, you know, Sukuna's around, there's a new strongest, but also Gojo dying is what prompts all these other characters, Yuji, you know, Yuta, all these other people to go on this massive training arc and become the strongest versions of themselves in order to actually fight Sukuna, you know? So, if, in a sense, you could basically say that he's a catalyst, right? He's the catalyst for many things to come later within the story. And that's pretty much the exact thing that his father, Toji, also did for the story and the world of, you know, Jujutsu Society, I should say. Him killing the Star Plasma Vessel and doing all that shit which started the events which Yuki brought up to, I believe, Kenjaku. Or might not have been Kenjaku, I don't know, but Yuki brings it up. Where he's like, yeah, or she's like, yeah, you know, Toji was the catalyst and prompting for all of these events that have happened over the last 12 years. So it's just pretty interesting that, you know, both Toji and Megami, his son, had these profound impacts on the JJK world and, you know, inspired things to come even after they personally had stopped having a direct role in the story, right? It's almost like GeGe knows how to write these characters and make sure that they have impactful, I guess, you know, things to offer to the story. You know, it's crazy, right? Because you look, and Toji and Megami are still having effects on the story dozens and dozens of chapters after they themselves have been taken out, right? That's really interesting, right? But if you don't believe me, that's fine. You know, just some food for thought. Just, you know, maybe GeGe is a good writer, but whatever. That's just my personal opinion. But in conclusion, right, Sukuna's reign over the story has been foreshadowed since chapter 1, and it's completely earned and justified within the story. He showcased incredible mastery over the power system of the verse. That's what even allowed him to split his body into these cursed objects and take over Megami's body. And even at this, you know, even after we admit that Sukuna's the GOAT, he completely outclasses and embarrasses everybody within the story. He is the GOAT. It doesn't mean that all these other characters are wasted and ruined, you know? Instead, it's just the motivating factor for them to be reborn as the strongest sorcerer of the modern age. I fucked that up. But, you know, that's the point, right? Like, it's not ruining these characters. It's not taking away from what they could do. It's just giving them a role. He's giving them a role to fill, right? He's serving as the target for them to progress and become strong, right? Like, that's the whole point, you know? But yeah, now that we've established that, we can move on to the final portion of this video, which was hinted at earlier, which is how GeGe apparently doesn't know how to end the story. I've seen so many people mention that, oh, you know, Gojo didn't kill Sukuna, you know, he should have killed him, or, oh, actually, GeGe was originally going to have Gojo kill Sukuna, but then she changed it, or whatever. It's like, and it's like, if you think this, number one, it can't be further from the truth, you know what I mean? And if you think it honestly probably, like, you just don't understand the series, you know? Gojo lost to Sukuna because Sukuna was stronger. That's just it. Like, if you read the series, you'll learn that. You know, it's pretty basic. Throughout their entire fight, Sukuna showcased that he was on a different caliber of sorcery than Gojo. He's a completely different level of sorcerer. He was constantly switching between domain amplification and his innate technique. He was able to switch off his own domain sure hit mid-fight and then undergo an impromptu binding vow, which extended the range of his barrier technique in order to encompass Gojo's and shatter it from the outside. The strongest of the modern era, by the way. Like, Sukuna was just on a completely different level, man. The spectator Kashimo said it best. If Gojo didn't have the 6 eyes, Sukuna would have him beat in terms of cursed energy efficiency. And there was just so many times throughout the fight where Sukuna had Gojo completely lost and confused, bro. He was looking around for guidance as to what Sukuna's game plan was, and he was honestly stressing the entire fight, you know? Whereas, you know, Gojo was in this desperate gamble for his own life. Sukuna, on the other hand, was engaging in the battle specifically to advance his own curse technique and grow as a sorcerer. You know, I could spend 20, 30, 40 minutes going over all the intricate strategies and 400 IQ, 5D chess gigabrain plays that Sukuna employed throughout the fight, but I think if you want to get a taste for what actually happened, you should read the manga. It's an amazing fight. I think it starts on chapter 222, I want to say, and then it ends 236. It's an amazing fight. You should definitely go read it if you want to actually see just the scale of Sukuna's just dominance over the strongest, because not to say he manhandles Gojo, but he performs extremely well and honestly embarrasses Gojo in a lot of instances throughout that fight. So I would recommend reading that. But to sum it up in one point, after fighting Sukuna to the death in the afterlife, Gojo states verbatim that Sukuna didn't go all out, didn't use his full arsenal, right? And that he thinks that even if Sukuna didn't have the 10 shadows, that he probably still would have lost. He says that to his best friend Geto verbatim, right? So, you know, anything I could say doesn't really matter, because the guy who fought Sukuna and lost to him says, yeah, bro, he's the shit, you know? Pretty absurd. There's a reason why Sukuna fought Gojo and killed him on September 23rd of 2023, and yet it's August of 2024, and he's still fighting. Alright, he's just built different. And you can be stubborn and say, oh, you know, this is all just plot, it's just happening because of the plot, but it's like, yeah, no shit, dude, alright? It's a written story, everything happens to further the plot, that's the goal of the author. If that wasn't happening, it would be a bad story, alright? And you would be a fool to ignore the reasons given within the story for why these events happen. It shows low media literacy and honestly a lack of willingness to engage with the subject material that you're so passionate to complain about. Almost as if you're not a real fan, right? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, you'd be hard-pressed to find a series where things just happen spontaneously and have no explanation. There's always a given reason, and JJK is no different. The given reason for Sukuna beating Gojo was that Sukuna truly embodied what it meant to be a calamity. He spent his entire life and the fight with Gojo searching with ways to expand his own technique and grow as a sorcerer. And that drive and willingness to achieve his goals is what defines the strongest. That drive is what allowed Sukuna to bide his time for over 1,000 years, waiting for the day he could finally return to life and exact his will. And it's that exact drive that Gojo lacked. Gojo fell victim to the human flaw of wishing to be understood, and it was that same flaw that made Jogo lose, which Sukuna pointed out in his fight. It's the act of grouping up and comparing yourself to other people, wishing to be understood. That human wish, right? That's what stunts your growth on the path to becoming the strongest. So when when Gojo spends his entire fight with Sukuna trying to reach Sukuna, humanize him, make him understand, he fails and falls short of what was needed to actually reach him. That's why Sukuna beats Gojo and goes on to grow, whereas Gojo dies and stagnates. But as I mentioned earlier, Gojo's successors, the New Age sorcerers, adopt the mentality needed to stand on equal footing with the King of Curses and continue the fight that Gojo failed to finish. And I think that's the point, right? I don't understand how you could see all that, read all that, and still think that GeGe is lost as an author. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me, you know what I mean? I feel like they know exactly where they're going with the story, and personally, I'm all here for it, alright? JJK has been one of the most profound mangas that I've ever read, and honestly, I've been completely enthralled with it since I first saw it. And that's the main reason that I felt the need to make this video, honestly, and speak on the discourse, is because honestly, I really do love JJK. It's in my top 3 series of all time. It's so good, man, honestly. Please read the manga, if anything. Read the manga. But, yeah, all in all, I think the majority of the complaints or issues with the series, they truly just come down to people misunderstanding the plot of the manga or losing sight of the vision that was laid out by GeGe. Which is, to be fair, people have things going on in their lives. They might not read every single chapter, go back and reread it the next day, whatever. But I just, if you don't know, don't make a claim. Don't be super convicted on something, Don't go running your mouth. Maybe take some time and actually read the source material and try to understand it. And with that, I am Sauceman K, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.